Alex had always lived in the quiet corners of life, the places where nobody bothered to look twice. At 19, he felt safer surrounded by books than by people, safer in the silence of a library than in the noise of any crowd. He was the type of student others overlooked. The boy who slipped into a lecture hall unnoticed, scribbled neat notes, and left before anyone even remembered he had been there. His comfort zone was ink and paper, words and thoughts, not sweat and steel. And yet, on that late afternoon in Boston, Alex made a decision that felt almost like trespassing. For the first time, he pushed open the heavy glass doors of the local gym. He had walked past it hundreds of times, always keeping his eyes low, pretending not to notice the confident bodies through the windows, the rhythm of pounding music spilling into the street. But that day, something inside whispered that he couldn't keep running from it forever. He needed to prove something to himself. The moment he stepped in, the air hit him like a wall. The sharp smell of sweat and iron mixed with the thud of heavy weights crashing back onto rubber mats. Music pounded from speakers overhead, fast, loud, aggressive. Dozens of voices layered over it. Conversations, laughter, short commands exchanged between training partners. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Everyone seemed to belong. Alex did not. His sneakers squeaked faintly on the polished floor as he walked in, gripping the strap of his backpack so tightly his knuckles whitened. His chest tightened with each step deeper into the room. Rows of treadmills whirred in motion, each occupied by someone faster, fitter, more confident. In the corner, weights clanged together in a rhythm that sounded like a foreign language. Nobody looked at Alex directly, yet he felt every pair of eyes on him. And then there was Connor. Connor was 20, only a year older than Alex, but he carried himself as if the whole gym belonged to him. Broad-shouldered, tall, with the casual ease of someone who knew he was admired. He laughed loudly, slapped friends on the back, tossed off jokes that drew whole groups into his orbit. He wasn't just another regular. He was the benchmark. People measured themselves against him, copying his form, waiting for his approval, laughing at his remarks. Alex spotted him instantly, and unfortunately, Connor spotted Alex too. The moment their eyes met, Connor's grin widened like a blade being unsheathed. He raised his voice just enough to cut over the music and the chatter. Well, he called across the room. Look who wandered in. Lost professor. The words landed like a stone in Alex's stomach. A ripple of laughter followed, not from everyone, but enough to sting. A couple of guys near Connor chuckled, already watching for the next line. Alex froze, his feet locking in place for a heartbeat. His first instinct was to turn and leave, to escape before the spotlight grew brighter. But pride held him there. He tightened his grip on his bag, forced his legs to move, and walked toward the dumbbell rack. If he pretended not to hear, maybe it would end. But Connor wasn't finished. You sure those arms can lift anything heavier than a book? He continued, leaning casually against a bench press like a king on his throne. Careful now. Wouldn't want you straining yourself flipping through too many pages. The laughter grew sharper. This time, Alex heard someone whistle mockingly. His cheeks burned, but he refused to look back. He set his bag down carefully, every movement deliberate, trying to hide the tremble in his hands. The dumbbells stretched before him like a row of judgments. He picked up the smallest pair, weights so light they looked ridiculous compared to what others were lifting. Still, his heart hammered as though he had chosen the heaviest bar in the room. He adjusted his stance, gripped the handles, and began to lift. His arms shook almost immediately, not from the effort but from nerves. He felt the heat of eyes on his back, the laughter pressing against him harder than the metal in his hands. Connor stepped closer, towering over him now. You know, he said, voice lower but laced with the same mocking tone, this isn't a library. You don't just stand here looking confused. You actually have to work. Alex wanted to vanish. His throat burned with unsaid words, his chest with humiliation. He could feel the expectation around him, the crowd waiting for him to break, to laugh it off, to retreat like a scared outsider who had no business being there. But he didn't. He adjusted his grip, tightened his jaw, and lifted again. Slower this time, more controlled. He stared straight ahead, refusing to meet Connor's eyes. The smirk on Connor's face faltered for the briefest second. The laughter behind them dimmed, and for a moment the music seemed distant. Alex didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't defend himself. He simply kept going, and in that stubborn silence, tension filled the air, an invisible challenge hanging between them. Connor's confidence pressed against Alex's quiet determination. The king of the gym had tried to put him in his place, but Alex wasn't playing along. For the first time, Connor looked at him not with mockery, but with something harder to name. Intrigue. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, Alex kept lifting the small dumbbells, his arms trembling, his jaw set with quiet defiance. He had no witty comebacks for Connor, no way to outshine him in front of the crowd. What he did have was stubbornness, and he clung to it as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. Connor watched him, at first with amusement, then with something else, something Alex couldn't quite read. The grin stayed, but it wasn't the same grin as before. There was a flicker of curiosity behind it, as though he had stumbled onto a puzzle he wasn't sure how to solve. The professor, as he called him, wasn't breaking. He wasn't playing along with the humiliation. The next day, Alex returned to the gym. His chest was still heavy with the memory of laughter, but leaving hadn't been an option. He had promised himself he wouldn't give Connor the satisfaction of driving him away. And to his surprise, Connor was waiting, not surrounded by his usual circle of admirers this time, but leaning casually by the dumbbell rack, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Back again, Professor," he said, his voice edged with sarcasm. "Guess you didn't collapse after the baby weights yesterday." Alex ignored him, setting down his bag with the same deliberate slowness as before. He picked up the dumbbells and began his routine. Connor didn't call for his friends. He didn't put on a show. Instead, he stepped closer, pointing out the angle of Alex's elbows, correcting his stance, mocking his grip while still guiding him toward the right form. His tone was sharp, almost scolding, but he stayed. He watched every repetition, and when Alex faltered, Connor was there with another biting remark that, strangely, didn't sting the way it had before. It was teasing, yes, but buried beneath the sarcasm was a thread of something steadier, an odd sort of attention Alex had never expected. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern repeated itself. Connor's presence became impossible to avoid. He appeared suddenly at Alex's side, sometimes laughing, sometimes rolling his eyes, sometimes barking instructions. Out loud. He still called him Professor, still exaggerated Alex's mistakes, still mocked his lack of strength. But in the quiet corners, when the gym was less crowded and the weight of watching eyes lifted, Connor's voice would drop. He didn't laugh as loudly. He didn't perform. He lingered, restless, his words slower, softer, carrying an edge of something raw. It was during one of those evenings when most of the gym had emptied that the mask cracked completely. Alex was finishing his set, his arms aching, when Connor sat on the bench across from him, towel draped around his neck, his chest still heaving from his own workout. For once, he wasn't grinning. He was staring at the floor, jaw clenched, silence stretching longer than Alex had ever heard from him. Finally, Connor let out a sharp exhale, as if releasing something that had been pressing on him for far too long. "You wouldn't know why I talk so much." His voice was low, rough, stripped of its usual bravado. Alex looked at him, startled by the sudden shift. Connor didn't wait for an answer. "Because if I don't, I hear it. The silence. It eats me alive. Everyone thinks I love being loud, being the center of everything. Truth is, I can't stand what happens when the noise stops." The words hung in the air, heavier than any weight either of them had lifted. Alex stared at him, trying to reconcile the king of the gym, the confident, untouchable leader, with the young man sitting before him now, afraid of something as simple as quiet. Connor didn't meet his eyes. He rubbed his hands together restlessly, his shoulders tense, as if every second of confession scraped against him. Alex felt something shift inside him. He had never imagined Connor as anything other than untouchable. To see him now, admitting weakness, stripped of the noise he used as armor, it unsettled him, but it also drew him closer. The boy who had mocked him, humiliated him, now revealed a crack so deep it made every joke sound hollow in retrospect. From that night on, the tension between them carried a new weight. Connor's sarcasm continued, his remarks still sharp, but Alex could hear the truth buried underneath. He recognized the defense, the desperate way Connor tried to drown out the silence. And he couldn't forget what he had seen in that moment. The unease, the fear, the loneliness Connor tried so hard to hide. Their strange rhythm continued, somewhere between rivalry and something unspoken. The mockery had shifted. It was no longer about driving Alex out, but keeping him close. Connor's words still provoked, still pressed against Alex like a challenge. But behind them lay an admission Alex could not ignore. Connor needed the noise because he was terrified of what the quiet revealed. And for the first time, Alex understood that the king of the gym was not as untouchable as he had once believed. The gym was quieter than usual that evening, the kind of quiet that felt almost heavy, though the air was still thick with the familiar smell of sweat and iron. Most of the crowd had already gone home, leaving only a handful of people scattered across the room. The clang of weights echoed here and there. The music from the speakers reduced to a dull background hum. For Alex, this was the best time of day. No laughter cutting through the air, no crowd hovering around Connor, no watchful eyes waiting for someone to slip up. Just focus, repetition, and the strange closeness that had developed between them. Connor was standing close as Alex lifted, his hand hovering near Alex's arm, correcting his form with an ease that had become routine. The sarcasm was still there, but softer, less cutting than before. He leaned in, his voice low, almost steady, and Alex could feel the warmth of his presence, not threatening this time, but strangely grounding. They had fallen into this rhythm over the past weeks, Connor guiding, mocking in his way, Alex refusing to break, both of them suspended in something unspoken. It wasn't friendship exactly, nor was it rivalry anymore. It was something in between, fragile but undeniable. They didn't notice the others at first. A pair of guys had stopped in the doorway, watching. Their whispers carried across the room, and Alex's concentration faltered as he caught the sharp edge of amusement in their voices. One of them snickered, nudging the other before speaking louder, just enough for it to echo off the mirrors and cut through the silence. Well, look at that. Didn't know the professor had himself a personal trainer in more ways than one. The sound hit like a blade. Alex froze mid-lift, his heart stumbling in his chest. He looked up just in time to see their smirks, the way their laughter spread like wildfire, pulling in more eyes, more whispers. It wasn't just two anymore. Suddenly it was five, then more, faces turning, grins widening, voices rising in jagged amusement. The weight in Alex's hands might as well have been a feather compared to the weight pressing down on him now. His chest burned, his skin hot, as the mocking laughter gathered momentum around him. And then Connor moved. The shift was immediate, brutal. The closeness, the quiet guidance, vanished in an instant. He jerked his hand away as if burned, stepping back from Alex as though the sight of him was something to be ashamed of. His laugh came loud, sharp, forced, slicing through the whispers and growing into a performance for the room. "Don't get the wrong idea," Connor said, his voice carrying, rehearsed for an audience. "I was just showing him how not to embarrass himself. That's all. Don't start making up stories." The words landed heavier than any insult before. The crowd roared with approval, whistles and mocking claps filling the air, feeding off the spectacle. Someone shouted another joke, another cruel punchline, and the laughter swelled, bouncing off the walls until the gym no longer felt like a place of training, but like an arena where Alex stood exposed under a spotlight. He could barely breathe. Every sound stabbed deeper, every smirk cut sharper. But worse than all of it was Connor's face. That deliberate indifference, the way his eyes slid past Alex, as if he were a stranger, as if the hours they had spent together hadn't meant anything at all. The boy who had admitted he feared silence more than anything now weaponized it against him, drowning Alex in a coldness more suffocating than the laughter. Alex's hands shook as he set the weights down, his vision blurred with humiliation. His chest felt hollow, caved in as if all the air had been stolen from him. He wanted to vanish, to melt into the floor, to retreat into the safety of books and quiet where nobody looked, nobody mocked, nobody betrayed. Yet even as he packed his bag with trembling fingers, the laughter clung to him, following like smoke he couldn't escape. The betrayal wasn't just in the words Connor had spoken. It was in the choice he had made. Faced with the crowd, Connor had chosen them, their approval, their cruel amusement. He had chosen to protect his crown, his place at the center, instead of protecting the one person who had seen the cracks beneath his mask. Alex realized, with a sharpness that felt like a blade pressed against his chest, that Connor feared losing the respect of those grinning faces more than he feared losing him. The room spun with noise, but Alex barely heard it anymore. What cut deepest was not the voices of strangers, but the silence from Connor. Silence, deliberate, merciless, final. In that moment, it was clear, whatever fragile bond had existed between them had been crushed beneath the weight of a lie spoken loudly enough for everyone to hear. Alex left the gym that night with his shoulders hunched, his head low, the echoes of laughter following him out into the night air. But what stayed with him most wasn't the crowd, wasn't the humiliation. It was Connor's eyes, looking past him as though he had never mattered at all. The days after that night felt endless, a blur of silence and retreat. Alex had stopped going to the gym altogether. Even the thought of stepping back inside made his stomach twist. He imagined the smirks, the whispers, the laughter that had circled him like a pack of wolves, and his chest clenched until breathing felt like a task. So he returned to the only place that had ever felt safe, the library. Hour after hour, he buried himself in pages, scribbled notes he barely read, forcing himself to pretend that words on paper could erase the echo of Connor's voice, that false, hollow laugh spoken for everyone but him. Yet no matter how many books he opened, the memory clung to him. Every paragraph blurred into the same image, Connor turning away, choosing the crowd, choosing the lie. Weeks passed like this, heavy and suffocating. Alex began to live as though he were invisible again, slipping in and out of lectures unnoticed, returning to his dorm room long before anyone else. But even invisibility didn't bring peace. At night, when the world was quiet, he heard it all over again. The roar of the crowd, the mocking whistle, the silence that followed when Connor refused to meet his eyes. He told himself he was done with it, done with Connor, done with the games of noise and cruelty. And yet, when he lay awake staring at the ceiling, what came back to him wasn't the laughter but the other silence. The night Connor had confessed his fear of it, the raw crack in his voice when he had admitted he couldn't bear to be alone with himself. That memory haunted him most of all. One evening, when the hallways were quiet and Alex was hunched over his desk pretending to read, there was a knock at his door. Soft, hesitant, not the kind of knock that demanded attention, but one that almost feared being answered. He froze. His heart jumped to his throat. Slowly, he stood, every muscle tight, and opened the door. Connor was standing there, but not the Connor from the gym, not the loud king of laughter who filled every room with sound and swagger. This Connor looked smaller, shoulders drawn in, his face stripped of the easy grin that usually guarded it. There was no crowd behind him, no audience to perform for, only an unease that made him look strangely out of place in the dim light of the doorway. They stared at each other for a long moment, silence stretching heavy between them. Alex's chest tightened, anger rising fast, but so did something else, confusion, disbelief, a flicker of recognition. Connor shifted his weight, dragging a hand through his hair as if buying time, before finally speaking in a voice that was low and uneven. "I can't keep doing this." The words were rough, unpolished, stripped of the sharpness he usually wielded. Alex's first instinct was to laugh bitterly, to slam the door in his face, to remind him of the way he had shoved him aside, the way he had performed cruelty like it was second nature. But he didn't. Something in Connor's tone froze him, forced him to listen. "Doing what?" Alex asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "Playing him," Connor said quickly, jerking his head as though toward some invisible shadow of himself. "The guy at the gym." The hero. The loud one. The one everyone expects me to be. I don't even know who that is anymore. I just put him on every day like a costume, and every day it gets heavier. The admission landed like a weight Alex hadn't prepared for. He swallowed hard, his thoughts colliding, but Connor went on, words tumbling out faster now, as if he had held them in too long. I hated myself these past weeks, Connor continued, his voice breaking on the edges. Not because of them, not because of the rumors. Because of me. Because I pushed you away. Because I chose them instead of you. And it didn't even make me feel safe. It made me feel empty. I thought I'd protect myself by keeping their approval, but I lost the only part of me that was real. Alex's chest tightened until it hurt. His anger wanted to rise, to shout at him, to ask why. Why he had done it, why he had needed to make him nothing in front of everyone else. But beneath the fury was something he couldn't ignore. The raw truth in Connor's eyes, the exhaustion in his voice, the way his shoulders sagged as though carrying the weight of all his lies. Then why? Alex finally asked, voice cutting sharper for being so controlled. Why humiliate me? Why pretend I didn't matter? Connor's reply came quickly, unpolished and raw. Because I was scared. Scared that if they saw me without the mask, I'd disappear. Scared that if I lost their respect, I'd lose everything. But I was wrong. The only time I wasn't pretending, the only time I actually liked who I was when I was with you. The words filled the room with a silence neither of them dared to break. Alex's pulse hammered in his ears. He wanted to believe him, but the wound was still raw, the betrayal still sharp. Trust was not something he could hand back easily. And yet, Connor stood there stripped of every defense, his mask shattered, his confession hanging heavy between them. For a long moment, Alex said nothing. The silence pressed down like a question, daring Connor to step closer or retreat forever. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't healing, but it was real. And for the first time since that night, Alex could see Connor as he truly was. Not the king of noise, not the untouchable leader, but a young man standing on the edge of collapse, desperate to be seen without the mask. When Connor returned to the gym, it wasn't the same as before. He still carried himself with the same physical presence, broad shoulders, head held high, steps measured with confidence, but the air around him had changed. The swagger, the need to fill every corner with noise was gone. Where once his laughter had been the loudest sound in the room, now it was silence that followed him in, a silence that unsettled those who had always looked to him for entertainment. The crowd that once gathered to bask in his energy began to thin. Friends who had cheered his every joke now exchanged wary glances, their conversations tapering off as he passed. Some offered half-hearted greetings, smiles that didn't reach their eyes, while others whispered behind his back, sharp voices carrying mockery. The king they had once admired had returned without his crown, and the throne they had built for him suddenly seemed empty. Connor noticed it all. Every hesitant glance, every forced laugh, every friend who drifted away when he no longer fed their need for noise. But he didn't fight to claw it back. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to perform. The music still thundered from the speakers, but he no longer turned up the volume to drown out his thoughts. The laughter of others no longer dictated how loudly he had to live. And though their rejection stung more than he wanted to admit, beneath it was a sharper, cleaner feeling, relief. Alex saw the change immediately. He hadn't stepped into the gym since that night, but when he finally did, his chest tight with dread, he expected the same old stares, the same cruel whispers ready to crush him. Instead, he found Connor training alone, his movements focused, steady, stripped of exaggeration. There was no circle of admirers clapping him on the back, no audience waiting for the next line. Just a young man lifting in silence, his jaw set, his rhythm deliberate, as though every repetition was a choice to keep going without apology. The whispers didn't disappear. If anything, they sharpened at first. People smirked when they saw Alex return, their eyes flicking between him and Connor like they were waiting for another show. But when Connor ignored them, when he didn't rise to their bait, their cruelty began to ring hollow. And when Alex set down his bag and began to train beside him, the tension in the room grew thicker. Together they moved through their exercises, their rhythm unspoken but steady. Alex's silence, once seen as weakness, became an anchor. Connor's restless energy, once reckless, drove them both forward. The differences that had clashed so violently now balanced in a strange harmony. Still, not everyone approved. Some of the loudest voices remained the cruelest, throwing barbed jokes across the room, waiting for either of them to break. But the boys no longer flinched. The insults slid off them because they had learned something the others hadn't. The ones who mocked the loudest were often the emptiest. Their laughter echoed through the gym, but it was brittle, cracking at the edges, revealing more insecurity than strength. Slowly, almost invisibly, the mockery began to fade. People grew tired of repeating the same jokes when neither Alex nor Connor reacted. Some drifted into indifference. Others even began to nod with reluctant respect. But neither of them trained for approval anymore. They didn't wait for acceptance, didn't ask for permission. Their defiance was in their presence alone, side by side, unflinching under the weight of judgment. For Connor, the lesson was brutal but lasting. He saw clearly that the friends who had once cheered the loudest offered nothing when the performance stopped. Their loyalty had been an illusion, vanishing the moment he stopped playing the role they demanded. In losing them, he had gained something he had never known before: freedom. Freedom from the noise, from the constant need to keep a crown balanced on his head. Freedom to exist without apology. For Alex, the transformation was quieter but no less powerful. He had lived believing safety could only be found in retreat, in silence hidden between pages and walls. But standing beside Connor, refusing to yield to whispers and stares, he discovered a strength he hadn't known was possible. Silence was no longer punishment. It became a steady force, shared instead of hidden, a reminder that strength could be quiet but unshakable. The gym didn't change overnight. There were still sharp glances, still laughter that lingered at the edges. But the noise no longer defined them. The ones who mocked remained trapped in their emptiness, their lives built on shallow applause that faded the moment the crowd turned away. Alex and Connor, by contrast, carried something heavier but far more valuable: the courage to be seen as they truly were. And in the end, that courage became its own defiance, its own victory.